Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the post-lunch dip. This is always my favourite session on any day that I come to talk to people. My name is Paula Brockwell, and I'm going to be talking to you today about museums and galleries as the untapped resource for a happy workforce. So, to introduce myself properly, I am a chartered occupational psychologist. It is absolutely my day job and my passion to help people have more positive experiences at work and support organisations to allow people to deliver in a sustainable way that's about them feeling energised and proud and excited about what they're doing rather than knackered and exhausted and feeling a bit out of control. So I'm a bit passionate about this topic called well-being, and I'm really excited to talk to you today because I was approached by Art Fund a little while ago to look at some research that they've done around the impact that museums and galleries can have on individuals' well-being, and think about how that research might be applied to the corporate setting, what we might be able to learn from that, and how that might be able to be used, to be fed into being used to supplement and support really great wellbeing initiatives, but also thinking about how the approach that you use something like their National Art Pass, which I'll talk about later, to really think about, think about and apply it from a behaviour change perspective that's not just about, as you know yourself, the risk that we've got lots and lots of benefits available to people, but they don't necessarily access them or use them in the way that we could. So today's session is about a few things, really. It's about me talking about my favourite topic in the world, so I wanted to show you a version of me on a good day. This is the person you're going to get today, the excitable one who gets, well, in this picture, I'd literally just fallen face first into this river and I was climbing back out. So on that day, any setback that hit me didn't seem to bother me, as you can see. So this is the person who's going to chat to you today. And I'm going to talk to you about a few things, really. I just want to share some of the research with you, and I'll give you a link to the research paper a bit later on if you want to look into that yourself. I'm going to talk to you a bit about how that actually links to corporate wellbeing strategy. So what is that data and what are those insights saying to us in terms of what do we really want to think about to make sure that we're taking an approach to wellbeing that is meaningful and is really going to actually support us in delivering behavioural change that actually delivers business results, not just a beautiful suite of an action plan that says there's lots of these things that are available or possible to do, but it isn't necessarily driving the habitual change that we want around things. And then we're going to think about how you could use some of those insights in practice and what that actually looks like in terms of thinking about that, working through. Does that seem reasonable? Everybody's in the right room. Good news. Okay, so I do recognise that it's the post-lunch dip, so we're going to take a minute to combat that, though. I can't help myself. I am a facilitator through and through. I'm just going to ask you to turn to someone near you and tell them something that has happened to you that has made you smile in the last 24 hours. If 24 hours is a stretch, I can't imagine it is because you've had a fabulous day today. You can go in the last week. So I'll give you one that's happened to me in the last week. I was on a lot of airplanes last week. I was coming back from holiday, but also working away. And on my very final airplane, I think it was my 7th in 3 days, so I was very tired and very bored of it, I'm going to be honest. A gentleman was leaning right into my seat, and he had his elbow right into my side. And my little boy that I'm growing gave him a kick in the arm that he had no idea about. I obviously don't look that pregnant. I am more pregnant than I look. And he just didn't know what had happened and where it had come from. He just stared at me and then sat over and spent the rest of the flight kind of looking at me like that. I think he thought my intestines weren't pleased with him. But it really made me happy on what was kind of, could have been quite a miserable journey really, but it genuinely made me smile. So chat to each other. Just share one thing. Keep it PG for me. We don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to have to do any debriefs. Something that's made you smile in the last 24 hours. Just share it with somebody nearby. Okay. So, why do we do that? Well, it's really just about this commitment that we all try to make whenever we're trying to make a real difference with well-being, which is about making it part of the everyday. So for me as a facilitator, not just accepting that you've been to lots of talks already today, that you've probably had the sausage and mash like I did, and you might have snuck back for seconds as well like I did. And that I could just carry on with the normal habits of introducing myself and telling you, look, there's some interesting things, let's pay attention to them. Or actually we could do something that's about creating a positive emotion, a bump, a social connection that actually brings you back into an energised and learning space that makes this session useful for you, rather than just we can tick the box at the end of it. So that's all that's about really. And also you get to hear something nice about someone else, and you get to remember something nice about yourself, which is just a nice thing to do, isn't it? So call me the sunshine bringer. So in terms of what we're going to do today, these three pieces, think about the insights from the research, but in exactly the way as I've kind of made a commitment there to you to be authentic in my passion about well-being, we're going to think about how can these insights be authentically used to start to drive that attitudinal and habitual change that actually makes a difference in well-being activities and shifts the culture of an organisation, which actually gets you the business results, rather than just doing what everybody else is doing and making sure that the action plan is in place and that the same 12 people are turning up to the sessions, but at least the sessions are full, etc., etc. So that's the conversation that we're going to have in the context of thinking about how we might be able to use something like museums and galleries to really get people to think about some of this stuff a bit differently. So into the research then. So why was I excited to talk to you about this? Well, because it's actually a good piece of research and it was done recently. So I'm in a nice position. Often when I'm talking to people about this stuff, it's research that I've done myself. So I'm saying, honestly, it was great and the researchers were very clever and very robust. But I can actually say this with clear conscience, because this is a bit of research that I've taken on to kind of interpret and work with from a corporate perspective. But it was kind of initiated by Art Fund, because what they could see that the people who are working with them, who are using the museums and galleries, are having better outcomes. Anecdotally, they could see that people were having kind of positive lives, positive experiences fueled by their engagement with those resources. And they wanted to really understand what the value to that was and what was being created around it. So they engaged a strategic insight firm to support them around this. The survey went out to about 2,500 people. It was only completed in August, so it's nice update data. And it was also followed up by some diary studies that were done with 9 people with kind of in-depth interviewing as well. So it feels like the insights, you know, they're quite robust, they're quite recent, and it just gives us some new information in terms of understanding what might be happening at the moment. So there are a few things I'm going to share with you. I'm not going to read all of these stats out to you for the sake of it, because you will be bored of the sound of my voice by the end of this session. But I'll let you have a read of these, and then we'll have a chat about what we think's happening here. So we can see that the study looked at a broad population, but as you start to look at the results here, we can see actually that the people who seem to be having some of the difficulties are those that are in the demographic of the working population that we're working with. So people are much more likely to be anxious kind of between the ages of mid-20s up to about 55. It drops off after that for lots of reasons really, the research suggests, around a reduction in life pressure, a reduction of connection to the little things that drive the rest of us potty, because they're thinking about a bigger plan and transition that may be happening on things. There is a sense that large urban populations seem to have a bigger increase around anxiety than people who work out of those kind of big populations. And what I thought was really interesting was that, you know, we can kind of look at the characteristics of what's happening in terms of anxiety, but when we start to think about what's happening in work and how this might be impacting people, we can see that there's really quite tangible things happening. So 60% of people who experience anxiety have difficulty sleeping. If you're sleep deprived, you're not effective at work, you're much more likely to make poor risk-based decisions, etc. So there's some tangible issues around that. That's all right. And also, those who are experiencing that anxiety are much more likely to say that life's overwhelming. Okay, so nothing probably particularly surprising there, but I think it's nice to see actually that there is a sense actually where we talk about needing to work with and focus on supporting people within the city, thinking about the working population in the context of the overall revolution that's happening within wellbeing within the UK and more broadly. I think sometimes we step back and think, well, society's going to do it, but we can see here actually that there probably is an issue with our working populations that we need to think about. And so we asked people a bit about their experience of the workplace, and we found a few things which I thought was quite interesting. So again, I'll just let you have a read of these, see what you think. So we can see here that there is a real trend of overload for people. There's a general sense that at least half of the people that we talk to understand that leisure time is important, and maybe we should celebrate that half the people did, but then that's half people saying actually leisure time isn't important in terms of my experience of pressure at work, which just seems a bit potty really when you think about what the research says about rest and refocus and being able to reset yourself around things. But I think there's a real sense in here that people aren't taking time out to rest and refocus. And if you look at a lot of the recent research around things like micro breaks and supporting people to actually take time to unplug from the work environment before they re-engage, and how that supports health outcomes but also supports performance outcomes, there's some quite worrying trends in here about what people's perceptions of work are. As I read this part of the findings, it reminded me of some work that I did on some research myself about 18 months ago, where we asked people what their definition of a good day at work was. So what did they think it was made up of? And what we found was that people really focused on getting things completed on their to-do list, feeling like they were in control of stuff, feeling like they'd achieved something day by day. So when you ask people outright, they say it's about productivity and getting the list ticked off to the point where everybody writes to-do list at the top of the to-do list, don't they, to get the first one done. But actually, whenever we did some statistical analysis on that and looked at people who were having positive experiences at work and had good health and well-being, actually what made them, or what seemed to be correlated to that, was more about taking breaks, having lunch, having time outside of work to fulfill the roles that we had more broadly. So having leisure time, being able to feel connected to ourselves more broadly as individuals rather than just as worker bees, and being able to recognise that we have other roles that we need to fulfil and have the capacity and energy to do that at the end of the work of the day, rather than pushing all of our energy into just getting work done, seems to be really important in terms of people's actual health and well-being. So starts to suggest that there's a bit of an attitude gap here. You know, people think that a good day is one thing. Actually, what seems to drive health and well-being is probably something else. So whenever people are actively trying to cope around their health and well-being, there's a real risk that actually what they do is try and drive their behaviours into stuff that isn't making them happy and healthier. It's just making them feel a tiny bit more in control in the short term. I think this research really resonates for me around that, in terms of such a high proportion of people saying that they're eating lunch at the desk, or they're skipping it altogether while they're at work because they're just trying to get a few more things done. Okay. So this really starts to pick up, I guess, on some of the attitudes. What we were trying to do is understand here, why are people sacrificing their leisure time for work? What is that really about? And I think there's a few things. So you can see here that 67% of people value time for themselves. That's a reasonable percentage, but it's still not huge given how much information is out there about how important that rest and refocus really is for people. 27% of people feel guilty for taking time for themselves, and 24% of people that we talked to just didn't feel that they spent enough time with their kids. And that really seems to be impacting then the fact that people are feeling overwhelmed, they feel like they're time poor, and they're making choices then about how they use their leisure time that's about expending lower levels of energy than perhaps they would do if they felt like they were less overwhelmed and stuff. Now, I'm not putting any judgment on the television that people are watching or the social media that they're using. If that was my stat, though, I'm not sure that the Housewives of Orange County habit that I've got is the thing that's going to get me healthy and energised by the end of the day. But we can see that while some of us feel like we really are time poor and we feel like we're not spending time with our kids, etc., stuff that we would say is really quite important, there are other things that are probably leaking our time that will not be things that we are consistently making choices about in terms of good leisure time that energises, resets us, but perhaps are just habitual things that we're doing because we're feeling low energy and feeling overwhelmed. So again, it might be that people are watching some stuff that really stimulates and energises them and interests them, but it's likely that for many people there's this kind of instinct just to sit down and watch whatever's in front of them, really. Does that make sense? So there probably is time there. This starts to set out for us the challenge, I think. We can see here that if we're really going to get people to engage with us, to make good use of their leisure time in order to energise themselves, we probably need to help them understand that they have more time than they think they do, or find time if they haven't got that time, create those pockets for themselves. We need to help them understand what the benefits of that are in terms of really being able to engage, build energy and have the capacity to deal with work or other life pressures rather than just kind of digging on through and hoping that you get past them, because I think we're past the point that the to-do list ever drops, does it? It just kind of gets bigger as we go. So there's a big shift here around attitude that we need to support that allows us then to take much more of a kind of behavioural perspective, I guess, around looking at well-being. So this is some of the stuff that suggests that we need to make this change. So you can see here that this just gives a bit of an indication of the importance of leisure activity. So there is a significant difference when people are spending time on leisure activities daily. They're much more likely to feel satisfied, to feel happy, to feel less feelings of anxiety on a day-to-day basis. So there's a real role for leisure activity, whatever definition you want to give on it. We were pretty broad here. But the research did specifically ask people about visiting museums and the influence that that had on them. And it goes from kind of dark blue of visiting once a month right through to the light blue that's never visiting with decreasing increments in there. But you can see that there's quite a difference here. So when people are using museums and galleries more regularly, they're reporting a greater sense of positive emotion and also sense of purpose, which are really the things that drive the emotional energy that allows us to actively manage our broader kind of well-being around kind of financial, physical and social as well. You know, you've probably heard people talk a lot about mental health and emotional health today, and I think often that's because if those elements, if emotional energy in particular is low, it's difficult to support people to actively take control of the other areas. So working on and supporting that is often a way to energise and engage people through being able to make more proactive choices and have the brain space and capacity to change the other areas. Does that all make sense? Yeah. So how are we getting leisure time this afternoon then? Have we got a revolution? We all need to think about how we're going to introduce it for ourselves, I think, to start the revolution. Well, why is it important? A few things. You'll probably be aware of this. This is kind of the pressure performance curve. This kicks about a lot in the wellbeing literature, so just a bit of a simplified version of it. What we know is that when you're thinking particularly about workplace performance, if you can support people to get to a place where the pressure that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis is balanced with their capacity to cope, then it's much more likely that they will be able to be in a place where they're feeling focused. They're having a good day, they're, positive well-being, use whatever words you want around it, but they're in a place where they have the capacity to deal with what they're facing on things. The idea is that if we can support people to get to a place where they are building that emotional energy, that social connection and that sense of fulfillment through proactive leisure time that really makes them feel good rather than coast them on neutral, then it's much more likely that we're going to be able to support them to balance fluctuations in pressure. So we're going to get better performers at work if we're supporting them to feel like they have the capacity to cope. And the way that you do that is two things. One is about giving them a strong sense of purpose, a connection, a reason to do things, but the other is about supporting positive emotion. And you do that through lots of things, something that's interesting, social connection, but also doing stuff that just makes you feel kind of proud and energised of what you're up to. So we want as much as possible to support people with that, and I think we can see within this research that actually this is what's happening, where people are feeling like they don't have time, they're under pressure, they have too much to do, they're feeling guilty about not seeing their kids. That's really ramping pressure up to a place where they start to feel that sense of overwhelmed and anxiety and into the stressed out zone. If we can support them to take time back, rebuild energy, etc., we're much more likely to help them pull themselves back into the focus space on things. Yeah, makes sense? Okay, so what we're going to do now is just think about, so what, how does this relate then? So what I want to do is just share with you a bit of a kind of psychological approach or a real kind of behavioural attitudinal change approach to strategy. I know that there's been quite a few sessions on strategy today that have focused on different things. Hopefully this just gives you something to think about. So the first thing I would say, and I spend quite a lot of my life working with businesses trying to help them to build a wellbeing strategy that's actually going to drive change. And my overall observation is often when people are building a strategy, often what they're actually doing is building a tactical plan on things. So what they're really creating is this kind of sense of clarity of activity of what they want to do. And there might be a statement of intent behind it, but what it's not necessarily doing is really focusing on getting to the difficult things around trying to create kind of a sustainable culture. So for me, there's a few things that a really effective wellbeing strategy needs to do. It's got to focus on a sustainable culture. So it's got to consider how you create healthy working lives, so a working environment that is going to support people to be able to have a positive environment, but also to make positive choices for themselves. So it's supportive, enabling, and allowing them to be able to succeed around feeling connected and energised within their work environment. People need to have good physical and emotional health, and you can link all sorts of kind of social, financial health, etc. behind that, because if you haven't got those other pieces, then the physical and emotional health doesn't come. A really good strategy creates a partnership between the employer and employee, so it's not just about what can we be doing for you as an employer, but how do we encourage you to take personal responsibility for your own actions around things. And that means that to allow that partnership to really be built, then actually your strategy has got to be thinking about how you build personal responsibility. Yes, you give people opportunity to try different things, but you really are giving people the opportunity to think about what is going to work for them, what's sustainable, what fits with them, what they'll be motivated to do differently to work through. So giving them a breadth of resources, solutions, opportunities to be different is quite important. And I think definitely my experience is that we are less focused on something like exposure to arts and culture, etc., than we are about the nuts and bolts of let's give people what they need around their EAP for financial health, or do some stuff on CSR, which is a bit about connecting the community, but it's not necessarily how do we feed for those people that's really important. How do we help to feed their sense of connection to creativity and more widely to things that are happening. So how do we make that happen? I think there's a few things that you can do around this. You've got to build base awareness and attitudes around the benefits of well-being. So I think this is one of the biggest derailers that we see whenever we're talking about well-being, is often a lot of activity is put in place without necessarily thinking about what do people actually believe about well-being. So if you go in and talk to your population, do they think that a good day at work is getting everything ticked off, so therefore going to that lunchtime session that you're arranging is stopping them feeling in control? Or do they understand actually that if they go to that lunchtime session that you've set up, or they just go for a walk or whatever it may be, that actually they'll be more productive and effective in the afternoon? Do they understand that? Do they see themselves as a gym person, or that's not for me, that's what other people do? You know, helping people recognise that all of this is within their own gift is important, and that they can actually influence it's important. So often that bit around communication and engagement, around individuals' roles to manage their own well-being and their capacity to change is really important. Once you've got people to a point where they think, well, this is quite interesting, maybe I can be the change that I seek, you know, maybe I can do something, you've got to show them how to do it differently. So giving them the knowledge about what to do differently and how is really quite important. And once they've got that, you've got to give them the opportunity to try new things. And I guess this is a bit like, you know, whenever your toddler was first starting to learn to walk, what you didn't do was just kind of leave them crawling about and think that they might work it out themselves. You probably sat at one end of the living room and called them and encouraged them. You gave them a safe place to try out that new behaviour, and you were there to support them. So there's something about recognising that a desire to do something and the knowledge to do it isn't always enough, particularly in a culture which maybe is set up to accept different behaviours. So you've got to give people the opportunity to try that thing out, to test their new belief that maybe that is something that they could do, to allow them to be effective. And once they start to test, the last piece is really important, which is about supporting, rewarding and reinforcing it. So in the same way as you wouldn't leave your toddler to wander about against a kind of a sharp coffee table, if they bang their head, you don't ignore them and hope that they pick themselves up and get on with it. You probably lift them, right them and encourage them on. You check for a headwind, but send them on without too much of a fuss. That sense of kind of support and reinforcement is really quite important, and is often something that we miss.
I've just got a quick question. First point actually related to something to me in my workplace, when I spoke to staff about it's senior management, about taking their lunch away from their desk and taking a break. And some of the responses that I got was, well, you know, I don't think I'm going to get my work done any quicker if I take a break, so I might as well just stay by my desk. Like, how do you kind of, when it is that top point, like, how do you, when you have that attitude, how do you change their view so you don't think it's going to be better? Yeah. I think, well, you can still, what's the benefit of me going away from my desk? And you told them the benefit of going away from their desk, and they're still like,
yeah.
No.
So I think the truth is that you've got to demonstrate it. So you can do that in a few ways, either about personal stories with relatable others, so other people who have done that and are demonstrating it. So whether that's other senior leaders, it's got to be people who they will identify with as like me. So that can be quite helpful. Often that's much more powerful than research. But the other thing is often just about getting people to come with you on the revolution. So I will often talk to people about, just give me it once, just do it for me once, try it out and see how it feels. Let's experiment with this and see what it's like. So if you, it's a little bit like a kind of war of attrition really. You just want to get a little bit forward with people to get them to try that one new behaviour, that one new thing. And as they do that, you don't just leave them to hope that they've got it, but they support, reward and reinforce is about then revisiting, how did that feel, how was it different, what sort of mode were you in. I did in the introduction of the session, we did a bit of an energizer exercise, but I didn't just leave it and say, oh, that was nice, everybody said something nice to each other, explaining why that is, how it fits, helping people connect the dots to their own experience is the best way really to get that change to happen. But what I'm actually going to do is share some of that around how you do this in practicality. So using the National Art Pass as an example. So this is a pass that can be made available to staff that gives free access to over 240 museums, galleries and historic houses, and you also get 50% discount on things. So it's removing barriers but also creating kind of awareness and opportunity for people. There is a copy of the pass. There's a month free trial for you on your chairs actually, so go and see what you think. But this is the type of benefit that could be something that you provide to individuals, but in quite a traditional kind of wellbeing context. It's one of those things that goes onto a line of a wellbeing pack, or it's on the back of the notice board, or it's in the intranet, but it's not something that people pick up on. So what I'm going to do is just talk in practicality about how you might be able to run through on this. So how do we actually help people drive the base attitudes and beliefs around this? So this piece is about the traditional kind of health promotion and education piece, but you do it quite specifically in terms of supporting people to join the dots. So it's not just saying, you know, our health and wellbeing programme equals eat healthy, run healthy, take some time out, and here's a pass to do it. It's connecting it to what is important to individuals. So if you do those things, that builds your physical and emotional energy, that makes you a better parent when you go home at the end of the day, and that's the thing that's important to you. Or it's going to give you the energy to really do a great job at that presentation that you know that your promotion is critical to. So therefore, you know, taking an hour out before you go to do that is probably something that's beneficial. So hooking with people to really link it to their relevant priorities and really join the dots for them, and don't be scared to really spell it out, I think is quite important around this. And for this, the research suggests that the piece of education that the piece of education that we need to do is about supporting people to recognise and value their own personal space. And also, if you're using something like the Art Pass, it's about demonstrating them to you that these are great spaces for you to be able to go, get energised, have some brain space, but also be fuelled in terms of seeing something that might challenge you kind of cognitively and intellectually as well. Okay? So there's a big piece here about just joining the dots, but also that other piece that I just mentioned to you, sharing stories with role models and peers is really important. So we've also got to give people the knowledge of how to do things differently. So I think a bit of this is just about helping people recognise their own mode often. So, and that's pretty consistent across wellbeing, no matter what you're doing. You know yourselves. I'm talking to a room of educated people here. You know that whenever people are under pressure, whether it's physically or emotionally less well than they would like to be, cognitive capacity starts to drop, because actually our capacity is focusing on whatever it is we're dealing with, whether it's emotional distress or physical discomfort. And often we don't notice actually what's happening to our broader mode. We're just getting on day by day. So helping people understand that and spot it is really important. Support them in identifying what types of things they can do to make them happy. So not only providing an indication of a range of benefits for individuals, but also encouraging them to think about, well, what's the stuff that fuels me? What's the stuff that I really loved whenever I was 12 years old, before I started to, hurry up, shut up and behave the way that I was always told to do so? What were the things that excited and energised me, and how am I progressing to and being interested in those things? Reconnect them with that. Supporting them to actually understand what the benefits are is important, and suggesting practical ways that people can build their energy. So something like using the Art Pass to say, this is do the initial attitudinal stuff. This is why it's really helpful for this to do it. This is what you need to spot to allow yourself to recognise that you need to take some time out. And here's something that's available that means that it's dead easy for you to find your kind of local gallery or museum to use. And this is the benefits that you haven't got any prohibitive cost around it as well, because we're supporting you to use it. You then, once you've kind of done that, you might actually need to nudge a bit more. So this piece around giving people the opportunity to try new things. So yes, make the pass available, of course, but how do you start to build buzz? How do you start to build those stories and get people to try it out? Use things like your champions. They don't just have to be about breakout rooms or doing, breakout sessions at lunchtime or talking about the stuff that's available. Somebody could organise a lunchtime trip to the nearest gallery to get people to try it out for the first time. You could encourage social networking groups that are, like book clubs on the art appreciation, getting people together around the events that are happening near them, the exhibitions that are within their local area, and encourage them to talk to each other about it. And even do something like, if you know that some of your people are really quite family focused, rather than just doing the standard going at home on time, going home on time day that happens every year, where on a Wednesday everybody goes home at 4 o'clock, is it go home on early day, go home early day. Actually, just say to people, if you want to go and pick up the kids from school at one point this week and take them to your local, to your local museum or gallery to try it out, it's just a chance to build the habit that's about making it social, making it about what somebody really values, but also then supporting them to create the habits within their family system, rather than them fighting both against the habits at work and within their family to try and make a change happen. And then last but not least, continue to support, reward and reinforce new behaviour. So you've got to be consistent with your provision of benefits. Too often we see organisations who will provide a benefit for a year, it doesn't get the take-up that they want, so that gets pulled away, and it becomes this really quite floating sea of people being unsure what's available, or they've been working themselves up to try that thing and they haven't quite got to it because it's not available now. Recognise and reward those who make good make good use of the benefits on offer. You can do that centrally, or you can encourage managers to do that as well. If you were linking them to the fact that good well-being is linked to performance, they are much more likely to be able to recognise that if someone is taking 45 minutes out for themselves at lunchtime to go and see an exhibition, and they're coming back in a better mood, more productive and more creative, getting a manager to acknowledge and recognise that is a really helpful way to get other people to recognise that things are happening and adopt that behaviour as well. And I suppose the other thing that I would say is monitor the benefits and think about what the blockers may be. So using those 4 factors of attitude, knowledge, opportunity, and then kind of reinforcement and reward, and think to yourself, well, which 4 of these aren't in place, which of this isn't actually working, and go back and do a bit more of that to see if you can really start to nudge those blockers out of the way before you decide whether that benefit is a valid one or not. Does that all make sense? Okay. So if you want more information, the report's available. We'll send you the links to this afterwards. Also, you can get more information about the National Art Pass if you'd like to from the link that's there. As I mentioned, there's a free trial for you to try out if you'd like to. It's available in your delegate bags and on your chair, so you can take a friend. Look at that, you've got 2. How exciting! And also, a couple of the guys from the Art Fund team are here today. Sam and Amy are just at the front, so just grab them in the coffee break and they'll be happy to chat.